Today, we're diving into a really fascinating question. What if ancient India had already figured out the secrets to flight thousands of years ago? We're going to be looking at a text called the Vimanika Shastra. Now, some people claim it's a legitimate blueprint for building ancient aircraft. But is it lost science, or is it a modern-day fake? Let's dig in.
So, here's the big question, right? Could an ancient book actually contain the secrets to something as complex as aviation? I mean, it's a wild idea, and it's one that has kicked off a huge debate. At the very center of that storm is this one very controversial document.
And this is it, the Vaimika Shastra. The name basically translates to the science of aeronautics. The story goes that it's an ancient guide for building these flying machines, or vimanas, and it was written by a great sage named Bharadwaja. But, as we're about to see, the real story of where this text came from is, well, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the 1970s. The buzz around this book got so loud that a team of actual aeronautical engineers decided, you know what? Let's put this thing to the test. And they weren't just going to give it a quick read. Nope, they were going to analyze it with all the tools of modern science.
And listen, this was not a group of hobbyists. We're talking about 5 serious scientists from the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, one of the most prestigious research institutions in the country. Their mission was simple: figure out if the designs in this book could actually, fly.
All right, and this is where we hit our first major clue. The text claims to be from the ancient Vedic period, which was thousands of years ago, but when linguists actually studied the Sanskrit it was written in, they found something completely different. The language and style, well, they date the text to no earlier than 1904. That is a massive, massive contradiction, and a huge red flag. So even with that very questionable timeline, the team decided to focus on the biggest claim of all, the flying machines. Forget when it was written for a second. Could the blueprints inside this book actually lead to a working aircraft? The answer they came up with was, well, it was pretty decisive.
Get a load of this. This is a direct quote from their published paper. The geometries were unimaginably horrendous from the point of view of flying. Wow. I mean, scientists usually don't talk like that. Unimaginably horrendous. That tells you everything you need to know. These designs weren't just a little off, they were a complete non-starter. So let's break that down. First off, they found the aircraft designs were, in their words, poor concoctions, not real machines. It was obvious the author had absolutely zero understanding of how flight even works. Worse, the drawings didn't match the written descriptions, and the whole thing was just a mess of contradictions. But it gets even crazier. When they looked at how these things were supposed to be powered, the propulsion systems they described wouldn't just fail to create lift, they would actively work against it. Some of the principles described in the text literally violate the fundamental laws of motion. It's not just bad engineering, it's impossible engineering. And this right here really puts it all into perspective. On one side, you have this amazing claim, an ancient text from the Vedic period. But on the other, you have hard scientific linguistic evidence that says, nope, this was written around 1904. And that lines up perfectly with what the engineers found. A text full of impossible flying machines, probably dreamed up by someone in the early 20th century who was fascinated by the idea of flight but had no clue how it actually worked. Now, you'd think a scientific takedown that complete would be the end of the story, right? Case closed. Well, not quite. The debate around the Vimanika Shastra is still alive and well today, and it's really become a classic case of science versus pseudoscience. So you basically have 2 camps. In one corner, you've got the scientific conclusion from that 1974 paper. It's a modern text, and the machines are impossible. But in the other corner, proponents argue that the scientists just misinterpreted it. They say it's written in a kind of code, or that it describes super advanced concepts like vertical takeoff and landing. This idea persists because, honestly, it's a powerful and romantic one, this notion of a lost, technologically advanced civilization. It is really important to point out, though, that while the public debate goes on, in the scientific world, this isn't really a debate anymore. That 1974 study is still the only rigorous, peer-reviewed scientific analysis that's ever been done on the text, and its conclusions have never been credibly challenged or overturned by new evidence. So why do we still talk about this? Why does a debunked text matter today? Because the story of the Vimanika Shastra isn't just about an old book. It's actually a fantastic lesson in how we think and how we tell the difference between fact and fiction. When you boil it all down, this whole saga is a perfect example of the scientific method in action. It teaches us how we should approach any extraordinary claim, not with blind faith, but with a healthy dose of skepticism and a demand for real, testable evidence. It's all about separating what's real from what just sounds like a cool story.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? This whole process of critical thinking, it's not just for old Sanskrit texts. We are surrounded every single day by new claims, new theories, and things that just become common knowledge. So the real question is, what modern myths out there right now could really use this same kind of rigorous, evidence-based second look?